The king's resolve, King Henry the Worst stood in his tent, eyes burning with determination, a crown upon his head, a kingdom's hopes in his hands. The French had mocked his claim, but he would prove them wrong. His army was small, yet his heart was strong. "Victory is ours," he declared, raising his sword high. The men were weary, yet they nodded in agreement. Tomorrow would bring the clash. They were ready to fight. By dawn, they would march to meet their fate in the light. The march begins. The English marched in formation, weary but unbowed. The roads were muddy and the air was damp and cold. Henry's voice rang out over the noise, firm and commanding. "We march to honor, to glory, to victory." Soldiers whispered prayers, seeking strength from heaven above. The distant sound of French horns echoed through the mist. They knew the battle would be fierce, but they were not afraid. The day of reckoning was near, and none would hesitate. French arrogance. In a grand French camp, the nobles laughed and mocked. The English, they said, were outnumbered, weak and small. The knights, resplendent in their armor, drank and feasted. "We shall crush them beneath our boots like insects," one jested. Their numbers were great, and their spirits were high. France had the finest cavalry and a vast, proud army. But the day ahead would challenge their arrogance and pride. In the shadows, the English prayed for a miracle to guide. The battle's dawn. The morning mist hung low, thick over the battlefield. Henry V stood tall, his face set with resolve. The English archers lined the field, their bows at the ready. The French cavalry could already be seen on the horizon. Henry turned to his men, giving one final speech. "For England, for glory, for victory," he cried. His voice echoed across the silent field of fate. Then the first clash of weapons rang out, and the war began. The first volley. The English archers drew their longbows, their fingers steady. A rain of arrows flew, swift and sure, cutting through the mist. The French knights in their heavy armor were caught off guard. Arrows pierced through their ranks, chaos in their wake. Their horses, frightened and confused, reared and bucked. The French lines faltered as the arrows continued to fall. Henry watched, his heart filled with a warrior's fire. The battle had begun, but the French had not yet begun to tire. The French charge. With a roar, the French cavalry surged forward, determined. The ground was muddy, their horses struggling to gain speed. The English waited, steady, their shields raised high. The clash of steel met the sound of the war cry. A knight shouted, "For France!" as he spurred his steed, but the mud and the arrows slowed their furious charge. French knights fell, their armor weighing them down. The English archers kept firing, their aim true, no mercy found. The struggle for position. The battle raged on, a brutal struggle for ground. French and English locked in deadly combat, sword to sword. Henry fought bravely, leading from the front, undeterred. His men followed, their spirits high despite the odds. The French, disorganized, struggled to break the lines. The English archers' arrows continued to fly with precision. The battlefield was a swirling mass of steel and cries. Henry's heart surged as the tide of war began to shift. The battle's turn. The French, now desperate, attempted to break through. But Henry's men held firm, their determination unbroken. The mud was thick, and the ground was slippery. French knights stumbled, their attacks losing their strength. The archers' arrows kept thinning their ranks, unrelenting. It seemed that victory was slipping through the French grasp. The English shouted, pressing their advantage, relentless. The sun rose higher, casting its light upon the clash. The knights despair. A French knight, heavily armored, cried out in anger. "Where is our king?" he shouted, struggling in the thick of it. His armor was dented, his sword heavy in his hand. He tried to break through, but the English lines held tight. Around him, his comrades were falling one by one. The French were losing, their spirits crushed underfoot. He knew that Agincourt would not be their day. The tide of war had turned, and there was no escape. A king in the thick of battle. Henry fought with fury, his blade cutting through the fray. His eyes were wild with the fire of war, but his mind was sharp. His men cheered him on, inspired by his presence. No French knight could stand against the might of England. The battlefield was littered with fallen enemies. But Henry's heart knew this was the moment of destiny. The king did not falter, nor did he hesitate. In the heat of battle, he felt his glory await. The French leaderships collapsed. The French commanders, seeing their knights fall, began to waver. The battlefield was chaos. No order could be found. Their king, Charles the Mad, had not yet come to their aid. The knights panicked, losing their resolve, their numbers thinning. The French commanders tried to rally them, but it was too late. Their strategy had failed. Their cavalry was broken. A murmur spread through the French lines. "We are lost." The English were gaining, their victory growing near. The sun climbed higher, casting shadows on the bloodied field. The French, disorganized and shaken, began to retreat. The English advanced, pressing forward with relentless drive. Henry's voice rang out, rallying his men. The French broke, their once proud army fleeing in fear. The English surged forward, cutting down those who remained. Agincourt had been won. The battle was no longer in doubt. But the French were not finished yet. Their defeat had not yet been sealed. Scene 13, the pursuit of the vanquished. The French, now desperate, fled in all directions. The English chased them through the mud, slaying those who resisted. Henry, seeing the enemy retreat, ordered a halt. He would not let his men get carried away by vengeance. "We have won," he said, "but show mercy where it is due." The slaughter ceased, but the French nobles were captured. The English had emerged victorious, a testament to their strength. The battlefield lay silent, the cries of war slowly fading. The aftermath. The ground was littered with the fallen, both friend and foe. The English had won, but at a great cost. Henry surveyed the scene, his heart heavy with loss. Thousands of French and English lay dead upon the field. But the king knew the significance of this victory. France had been humbled, and England's glory had risen. Henry had not only conquered a battlefield, he had set his kingdom upon the path to greatness. The French king's regret. Back in his tent, Charles the Mad sat in silence. His army had fallen apart, their pride shattered. "How could we have lost?" he whispered to himself. His knights had underestimated their enemy's strength. Now he would have to answer to the court for this defeat. The Battle of Agincourt had cost France more than they could bear. Charles slumped into his chair, overwhelmed with shame. The loss of Agincourt would forever tarnish his reign. The English celebration. Back in the English camp, the soldiers cheered with joy. They had achieved the impossible, a victory against all odds. Henry V walked through the lines, proud but humble. His men had fought with valor, and now they could rest. Wine flowed freely, and songs filled the air. The English had gained much, and their spirits soared high. Yet Henry, in his heart, knew the war was far from over. The road to France was still long, but today they had won. If you like it, please like and subscribe to the channel.